During World War II, Argentina and Germany had very close ties because Argentina had German immigrants living there, leading many to believe that Argentina favored the Axis powers. However, this was proven to be false. Pressure from the U.S. led Argentina to join World War II on the Allied powers side. Argentina agreed to this due to the fact that they wanted to be a part of the United Nations.
It was 1946 when a military official named Juan Perón became the president of Argentina and changed politics forever. He embraced Argentina's laborers and bettered their lives with medical care, paid holidays, and a minimum wage. His policies became known as Peronism and were made enormously popular with the help of his glamorous wife, Evita. A peasant girl turned actress turned first lady, Evita worked tirelessly on behalf of the poor, providing them with schools, hospitals, and housing. Together, the Peróns created a political movement that has endured over half a century.
As a colonel in the Argentine army, Juan Domingo Perón took part in the 1943 military coup. He was appointed head of the increasingly important labor ministry, improving working conditions and winning the support of both rural and urban workers. Here in 1944, he met his second wife, the minor radio actor Eva Duarte, while raising funds for earthquake victims. They formed a formidable partnership.
Because Perón was so popular, members of the Argentinian military grew jealous. Perón was forced to resign and was arrested by the military coup. The arrest of Perón was intended to limit his power, and he was exiled for 18 years. However, this had the reverse effect, and Juan Perón was called back 18 years later to be president again. After the death of Perón, a military dictatorship was implemented in Argentina for years to come. In order to draw attention away from the dirty war in Argentina, President Leopoldo Galtieri, the head of Argentina's ruling military junta, authorized the invasion of the British Falkland Islands to promote national pride.
From then on, the British held the island, although the Argentinians continued to assert their claims diplomatically. Fast forward to 1976, and the Argentinian military staged a coup and George Rafael Videla took power. The repressive junta began to push to expand their borders. For instance, in 1978, the Beagle conflict brought the nation on the brink of war with Chile over islands in the Tierra del Fuego. In December 1981, Leopoldo Galtieri took over the junta, but he needed to gain public support as the country's economy was crumbling. So, advised by George Anania, Commander-in-Chief of the Navy, he prepared to take the Falklands. They assumed that there would not be a war, because the UK had made large cuts to their armed forces, and because it was too difficult for the British to fight a war in such an isolated place. In March 1982, the Argentine military escorted a group of civilians who had a contract to remove scrap metal from South Georgia Island, over 1,000 kilometers east of the Falklands, and hoisted the Argentinian flag. Then, before the British could act and reinforce their position in the South Atlantic, the Argentinians launched an invasion of the Falklands and South Georgia Islands in early April, easily capturing the undefended island. In Buenos Aires, thousands celebrated their victory, unaware that the British under Margaret Thatcher were in fact planning to respond. The British dispatched a large task force, while the UN failed to secure a diplomatic solution. After weeks at sea, a small unit of Marines recaptured South Georgia Island in late April, while the larger force pushed onto the Falklands, arriving in early May. British Sea Harriers managed to defend their navy despite being heavily outnumbered, and a British submarine controversially sank the Belgrano, which carried Exocet missiles, forcing the Argentine navy to withdraw. But the British still did not have air superiority, and the Argentines managed to sink a destroyer, HMS Sheffield. Nevertheless, on the 21st of May, with winter approaching, 4,000 British troops landed in the lightly defended San Carlos Bay. The Argentines responded by launching continuous air assaults and destroyed the British container ships carrying helicopters. So, with no transport left, the British soldiers set off on foot. Most of the troops travelled the 120 kilometres over tough terrain to the capital Port Stanley, while another 500 marched to an Argentinian garrison at Goose Green. On the 29th of May, after fierce fighting, the British emerged victorious at Goose Green and gained the morale boost they required. Meanwhile, the other force was only 12 miles from Port Stanley, but around 10,000 Argentinians, albeit inexperienced conscripts, were entrenched into hills, blocking their way. The British numbers were bolstered as reinforcements arrived in early June, and on the 11th of June, the British were ready to launch their assaults. Using the cover of night, they were able to drive the Argentinians from Mount Harriet, Langdon and Two Sisters. On the 13th, more successful night assaults drove the Argentinians from Wireless Ridge and Tumbledown, the last natural defences of Port Stanley. The Argentines fled back to Port Stanley, but as they did, morale and discipline broke down, and with the city surrounded, the Argentines surrendered on the 14th of April, ending the war. In Britain, the war helped Margaret Thatcher gain public support and win the election the following year, and successive governments have improved the defences on the islands. But for the junta in Argentina, the surrender proved to be their downfall, as they relinquished power in 1983. However, the sovereignty of the islands is still disputed, and in recent years, the Argentinians have begun pushing once again to take control of them.